There's a quiet kind of mind that never truly rests. Not because it is broken, and not because it is dramatic, but because somewhere in its earliest memories, silence was never just silence. For some people, quiet wasn't safety, it was information. It was a warning. It was an emotional undercurrent shifting beneath the surface long before anyone spoke a word. And when you grow up learning that silence can hurt just as much as sound, your mind stops trusting stillness. It keeps moving even in the dark. It stays awake even when your body tries to sleep. It protects you in ways you never asked for. They show up, they smile, they say they're fine. But beneath that practiced calm, there is a steady tide pulling inside them, a subtle current, a soft hum, a movement under the surface like water that refuses to settle. Most people don't understand this. They think deep thinkers are wise, introspective, and philosophical by nature. But many deep thinkers didn't choose depth. Depth was demanded of them. They became watchers before they became children, observers before they became themselves. When you look back on your life with honesty, you might realize you weren't born scanning the world. No child arrives studying tone, decoding expressions, and predicting danger. Something made you this way. Maybe you grew up in a home that was quiet in all the wrong ways. A place where affection was unpredictable, where moods shifted like tides without warning, where love felt like something you had to earn by being careful, thoughtful, good. Maybe conflict hovered in the air like fog, heavy but unseen. Maybe you remember the weight of a sigh, sharper than a shout. Maybe you remember footsteps that told you everything you needed to know before the door even opened. You didn't have the words for it then, but your body understood. You learned to read pressure in the room. You learned to shrink your presence. You learned to see danger in the smallest shifts. A delayed answer, an altered expression, a colder tone. Your childhood taught you that understanding was survival, and so your mind grew wider than your age, stretching itself to anticipate emotional storms nobody warned you about. Picture yourself at 6 or 7 years old, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor. You're drawing something simple, a house, a tree, a sky, pretending to be absorbed in your colors. But your real focus is elsewhere. You're listening to the adults behind you, to the tightness in their voices, to the way their sentences stop too abruptly. You hear the space between their words more clearly than the words themselves. You don't understand the content, but you understand the danger. You sense something shifting, a ripple across the room, a tension forming in the air like a wave preparing to break. And your small body braces for something it cannot name. That hyper-awareness becomes the blueprint of your mind. You don't choose it, you inherit it. And once it becomes part of you, the world never feels simple again. This is how the emotional loop of a deep thinker begins. As you grow older, something small, a glance, a pause, a message seen but unanswered, unravels you. You feel the old fear rising beneath your ribs, like water rising against a fragile shore. You feel the old instinct tightening your chest, preparing for an unseen wave. You start rewinding the last conversation, searching for the moment where everything changed. You read the silence as danger. You interpret neutrality as withdrawal. You feel tension that doesn't exist. You begin rehearsing versions of the interaction in your mind, analyzing your tone, your phrasing, your timing. You ask yourself if you said too much, if you asked too little, if you revealed more than you should have. People think you overthink because you're anxious, not because you want control, but because unpredictability once hurt you. People think you're sensitive because you're emotional, not because you're fragile, but because you learned to sense storms before they formed. And so the loop tightens. Someone hurts you, even accidentally, and your mind doesn't let you feel it. Instead, it rushes to understand them, their trauma, their fear, their reasons. You forgive people before you allow yourself to bleed. You rationalize their pain before you acknowledge your own. You write explanations for their behavior in your head, like it's your responsibility to justify every wound you receive. You don't get angry, you get analytical, you don't cry, you get philosophical, you don't defend yourself, you defend the person who hurt you. Because anger never kept you safe as a child, understanding did, and without noticing, you carry that pattern into every relationship you enter. You become the person who reads every shift in someone's tone, but never asks whether anyone can read the shifts in yours. You become the friend who notices when others are hurting but doesn't know how to say, "I'm hurting too." You become the partner who anticipates every emotional need except your own. And slowly, without any dramatic moment to mark the change, you begin to disappear from your own life. Not because you want to hide, but because you were trained to feel the currents under the surface, instead of stepping fully into the water. You exist on the edges of conversations, in the pauses of interactions, in the unspoken spaces where other people never look. And this is the painful irony. The more deeply you see others, the less others seem able to see you. People praise you for being wise, perceptive, and grounded. They admire your ability to stay calm, to understand, to offer clarity. They come to you for advice, for interpretation, for emotional translation. They say things like, "You always know what's really going on," unaware that always knowing what's really going on is exactly what exhausts you. They think depth is a choice. They think sensitivity is a gift. They never guess how much of that gift was built out of fear, how much of it grew from standing too close to storms long before you understood what storms were. And while others move through life with a simplicity you envy, laughing without analyzing their laughter, loving without questioning their worthiness, resting without thinking about the meaning of rest, you find yourself stuck in a world that feels heavier than it should. A world where every moment contains hidden subtext, every conversation contains layers, every silence carries weight. You want to experience life simply, effortlessly, like they do. But your mind keeps pulling you back into depth, into interpretation, into the familiar waters where understanding once felt like your only life jacket. Maybe this shows up when someone you care about grows quiet. They're tired, distracted, lost in their own world. But your mind doesn't hear quietness. It hears distance. It hears withdrawal. It hears the beginning of loss. You feel the air shift just slightly, and your nervous system reacts as if a wave is rising just behind you. You replay the last 24 hours. You read tone like scripture. You scan for clues. You brace yourself. Not because anything is wrong, but because wrongness feels inevitable. This is the legacy of a childhood spent predicting storms. Your body doesn't know the difference between past danger and present discomfort. So it reacts the same way, quickly, deeply, completely. And sometimes it shows up in smaller, quieter moments, ones nobody else would ever notice. Imagine being 10 years old, standing in the hallway with your hand on the doorknob. The house is silent, but it's the kind of silence that feels too heavy, too full. You're listening, not for sounds, but for shifts, a breath, a pause, a change in pressure. You try turning the knob, then stop. You try again, then hesitate. Eventually, you learn something without anyone teaching it to you, that entering a room isn't simple, that silence needs to be scanned, that safety needs to be measured. Years later, you still do the same thing, except the door is no longer a bedroom door. It's a relationship, a conversation, an intimacy you want but can't fully trust. And you still pause, trying to hear what isn't being said. Maybe it shows up when you care too much. When you love someone, your mind doesn't let you be present. It tries to protect you by imagining every possible way the connection could hurt you. You examine their silence. You dissect their words. You decode their gestures. You do this not because you mistrust them, but because you mistrust a world that once changed without warning. You mistrust the idea that anything good can last without your emotional surveillance. And so love becomes less of a feeling and more of a calculation, a constant monitoring of signals that were never meant to be monitored. Maybe it shows up in how you treat your own emotions, When you feel sadness, you don't just feel it, you analyze it. You trace it back to its origins. You turn it into psychology. You ask, why do I feel this way, instead of allowing yourself to feel the way? Vulnerability still feels like standing in chest-deep water without knowing when the next wave will hit. And yet the deepest truth of all is this: none of this is your fault. You didn't choose to become this way. You didn't wake up one morning and decide to see life from angles most people never consider. Something shaped you, something old, something heavy, something quiet, something that taught you long before you had words that attention equals safety, that understanding equals control, that interpretation equals protection. And the very thing that once saved you is now the thing that keeps you from resting. This is the paradox every deep thinker eventually encounters. What protected you then imprisons you now. The vigilance that kept you safe from unpredictable adults becomes the reason you feel unsafe, even with predictable ones. The sensitivity that helped you navigate unstable environments becomes the reason you struggle to trust stable love. The awareness that prevented you from being blindsided becomes the reason you stay alert long after the danger is gone. But recognizing the paradox isn't a failure. It is the first breath after being underwater for too long. It is the beginning of freedom. Because once you see the pattern, you can choose something different. Once you realize your mind is replaying an old script, you can refuse to perform it. Once you understand that thoughts are echoes, not prophecies, you can stop treating them like warnings rising beneath the surface. The shift doesn't come as enlightenment. It comes as a pause, a soft, subtle pause between what you feel and what you assume it means. A moment where you ask yourself, is this happening now, or am I remembering something old? Is this person truly pulling away, or is that just my fear speaking first? Is this discomfort a danger, or just unfamiliar water? Most people never realize how revolutionary a single pause can be in the life of someone who thinks this deeply. But for you, that pause is the first calm ripple after years of storms. It is the mind unclenching. It is the body releasing. It is the first moment where survival doesn't feel like the only option. And once that pause appears, once you feel that small space between the thought and the truth, something inside you begins to soften. You begin to realize that not every silence is a warning. Not every shift in tone is a sign. Not every delay is abandonment. Sometimes people are just tired. Sometimes they're lost in their own currents. Sometimes they're swimming through storms that have nothing to do with you. The world starts to open a little when you permit other people to be human instead of symbols of your past. Slowly, you begin returning to your body, the place you left years ago when thinking became safer than feeling. You start noticing things that were always there, but never felt real to you. The warmth of a cup between your hands, the gentle way morning light settles like soft water across the floor, the subtle rhythm of your breath moving without permission. You begin to inhabit your senses instead of your predictions. You walk a little slower. You chew a little more consciously. You let sunlight touch your face without turning it into a metaphor. You let sound happen without measuring its meaning. You let moments be moments instead of messages to decode. Healing for deep thinkers does not arrive dramatically. It doesn't feel like a sudden awakening. It feels like noticing the quiet ripples in places that used to be waves. It looks like the way you don't immediately spiral when someone grows quiet. It looks like enjoying a conversation without reviewing it afterward. It looks like your shoulders stay soft when someone asks, "Are you okay?" It looks like allowing sadness without dissecting its roots. It looks like letting joy exist without preparing for its disappearance. Healing also looks like asking yourself gentle questions. Questions your childhood never gave you space for. Does this thought nourish me or drain me? Is this fear happening now, or is it an old echo returning? Is this judgment mine, or something I inherited long before I understood it? Do I actually want this connection, or am I trying to earn safety again? You begin to realize that peace isn't the absence of thought. Peace is the ability to let thoughts pass like waves instead of drowning in each one. Peace is choosing presence over prediction, curiosity over fear, feeling over-interpreted, and slowly, beautifully, quietly, you stop rehearsing loss in your mind. You stop preparing for abandonment before love even begins. You stop interpreting every shift as danger. You stop assuming you are too much to stay or not enough to matter. You stop turning people's silence into prophecy. You stop turning your sensitivity into a burden. Instead, you begin remembering that you are allowed to take up emotional space. You are allowed to be understood, not just to understand. You are allowed to be held, not just to hold others. You are allowed to speak first, cry honestly, ask for reassurance, and be gentle with yourself in ways nobody ever taught you. And then, on a night so ordinary it feels almost forgettable, something changes. You sit quietly in the same room where your thoughts used to roar, and for the first time in a very long time, nothing hurts. Nothing tightens. Nothing spirals. Your mind still moves, but it's softer now, more like waves brushing the shore than storms crashing against it. You breathe, not because you reminded yourself to breathe, but because your body finally believes it is allowed to. And in that stillness, you meet a version of yourself you haven't seen since childhood. The version who existed before vigilance became your identity. Before overthinking became your shield. Before you learned to scan every room for danger. Before your heart became a place of analysis instead of rest. Before you believed that love had to be earned through interpretation. You see that younger self, small, observant, scared, and you realize something with a clarity that feels like soft dawn after years of night. They were never weak. They were never dramatic. They were never too sensitive. They were doing everything they could to survive waves much larger than they were. And now, as the adult they grew into, you finally have the chance to give them the safety they never had. Not by thinking harder, not by predicting more, not by understanding every possibility, but by letting them rest, by letting them be held, by telling them, in the quiet, steady voice nobody ever used with you, I'm here now. You don't have to protect me anymore. And when that truth lands, something inside your chest releases, a slow, quiet exhale you didn't know you were holding. You understand something you've been circling your entire life. The storm inside you was never trying to destroy you. It was trying to protect you in the only way it knew. But you are no longer living in a world where that protection is necessary. You can let your mind stop running. You can let your body unclench. You can let your heart take up space. You can let silence be silence. No longer a signal, no longer a warning, no longer a wave rising in the dark. And maybe, for the first time, you can let yourself be here, exactly here, in this moment, without interpreting it, without preparing for what comes next, without assuming the worst. You can let yourself exist without explanation, because the truth is simple, soft, steady. You were never meant to think your way into safety. You were meant to feel your way back into your life. And now that you finally understand this, now that you're standing in the calm after everything you've survived, maybe, just maybe, that's enough.